All right, let's talk Oregon Ducks. Despite the one loss, I still believe this is a team that can win the national championship this season and should be a favorite to win the national title. And I think most smart people would agree with that assessment. And the reason comes down to one man, and that is Dan Lanning and everything he does as the head coach of this Oregon Ducks program. And he recently made a really smart, kind of under the radar move that I think is critical for Oregon, which we'll break down in just 1 second, plus some interesting data. But first, I'm Nick. That is Andrew. And this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, this Oregon Ducks program, obviously a little bit of a bounce back last week, of course. They're still one of the top dogs. I know the loss, to Indiana was a tough one to bear, but it's a weird world we live in college football with the extended playoff where one loss during the regular season, if it reorients your program and get things headed in the right direction, like recenters the players, not the worst thing in the world. Of course, we saw Oregon go undefeated last year. We saw how that worked in the playoffs. So I think the one loss, sort of like how Ohio State lost to Michigan before the postseason last year. In fact, Ohio State lost to Oregon as well. It allowed them to recenter themselves. I think that loss a few weeks ago will have the same kind of effect on Oregon, but it only works if you have a really smart, capable head coach, and Dan Lanning is that to a T. And what he does with the X's and O's and the in-game strategy is really solid. I mean, it's A-plus work. His recruiting and transfer, really A-plus as well. But it's how he manages the cultures and the players that is also critically important. And he recently made an under-the-radar move that I think is really important. Let's pull up this report right here, courtesy of On3 Sports. Then we'll get into some interesting data on the other side. From the report, on Wednesday, Oregon head coach Dan Lanning met with the media for a final time this week. Up next is his home game with Wisconsin as the Ducks enter the contest as heavy favorites. Lanning kept it short and sweet with the entire media session lasting about 3 minutes. Yeah, Tatum never gets enough credit, man. He's an unbelievable player, big-time guy for us on the edge, always does his job, really takes the time and effort to know he's in the right spot on film. But he's one of those guys that we trust when he's out there on the field for us. So we're talking about Tatum, T-O-T. I'm going to call him double T or Tatum or however you pronounce it. I apologize. I'm going to butcher it. I'm going to call him T-O-T or double T just to make it easier for me. So apologize in advance, Oregon fans. I'm going to butcher it. So double T, T-O-T. Listen, he's become a star player, but he hasn't gotten the respect, like Dan Lanning has mentioned in his comments there, that he deserves. He hasn't gotten the publicity. Call it a little West Coast bias, right? The way a lot of star Oregon Ducks players don't get the publicity in terms of the ESPNs and the Fox Sports and the social media attention. But when you look at the data, guys, Tuioti is playing at an absolutely incredibly high level. In fact, let's pull up our first chart here, Mize, if you don't mind. This is looking at Tuioti versus other Big Ten linebackers, comparing tackles for loss in the run game and sacks, right? And you can see there's a lot of faint dots across the screen. In the upper near the top there's Tuioti. You can see his face pretty clearly. He's the league leader in Big Ten linebackers, qualifying Big Ten linebackers in sacks. This is per True Media. In tackles for losses, and in sacks, he's near the top of the pack. He's above average. So you can see he's one of the best defensive big play linebackers in the Big Ten right now, standing out above the pack. I mean, in terms of TFLs, there's no one better. In terms of sacks, he's in the upper third. So when you look at the complete package, he stands out. In fact, one thing you'll notice, if you look at the top sack leaders, some of the faint dots there on the right side of the graphic, a lot of them are near the bottom in TFLs in the run game, which makes sense, right? Normally football players, you're a pass rush specialist or your run defense guy, not Tuioti. He is a complete package, a complete player. But let's take it up a notch, to quote a famous celebrity chef here. Let's look at Tuioti versus other linebackers nationwide. The same graphic, Miles, if you wouldn't mind pulling it up on the screen here, but this is nationwide, not just in the Big Ten. And you can see upper right-hand quadrant, once again, near the top in tackles for losses and above average in sacks. And I want to compare him. You can see he's that red dot kind of in the upper right there. I want you to compare him, guys, to the other red dot, Arvell Reese, the linebacker for Ohio State. He's the opposite of Tuioti. He's gotten nonstop media publicity for the past month, right? Everyone is raving about him. I mean, you turn on ESPN, you turn on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, everyone's talking about Reese. And look, he's a very, very good player. But you'll notice that in terms of where they sit on the spectrum, Tuioti is actually better, right? He's got more tackles for loss significantly and basically about the same amount of sacks, right? Reese has like maybe one more overall. So again, we're talking about Tuioti, again, same conference, same competition, roughly, and he's more productive. He's a better player, in my opinion, certainly not any worse, but he's not getting any of the publicity, not nearly as good. And I think it speaks to what Dan Lanning does at Oregon that's so important, is that he calls out specifically players that deserve the attention. He generates the buzz. He generates the publicity. Because Lanning, he's a vocal guy. He's a passionate guy. He's not Nick Saban, right? He's not one of these guys that is very, quiet and humble and, keeps things close to the vest, right? He's a very vocal upfront guy. So when he talks, right, people pay attention. People look at what he's saying. He draws a lot of eyeballs, right? He basically is a one man bringing attention to Oregon. That's what he does. It's one of his primary goals. Of course, helps in the recruiting and transfer game to do things like that. And for him to give Tuioti the credit here, I think it's a great sign for obviously the young linebacker to get the props that he certainly deserves. But it's also a great move by Dan Lanning for the culture, right? Because I've been on football teams. I played small time college football, FCS, right? So nowhere near Oregon, nowhere near Big Ten, of course. But I've been on football teams that had good players. They were really good players, but they just didn't get a lot of media attention, right? In my case, there's a couple of linemen I played with. But the coaches never shouted them out, never gave them a lot of public praise, nothing like this. And it just won their morale because they were good players. They were practicing hard. They were good leaders, doing everything you wanted. But they never got the public praise in the media, never got the public praise in the PR or anything like that. And as a good player, and not talking about me, talking about my teammates, I can tell you from experience, it wore them down. It defeated them spiritually because they knew they were doing everything right or pretty darn close to it, and their own coaches didn't have their back. Different case here with Dan Lanning, going above and beyond. Didn't have to say all those nice things, didn't have to point out how good he's been, but he did. And I think it's a really smart move by Lanning to do that. And just one final point to end on here, just to throw out one more graphic. Let's go ahead and throw this on screen here, Mice, if you don't mind. Let's look at Oregon's defense as a whole from a team perspective, right? When we talk about defensive EPA per play and defensive snaps, you have snaps as the x-axis on the screen there, and defensive EPA per play is the y-axis. And you can see Oregon right there among the tops in the Big Ten in defensive EPA per play, right behind Ohio State, Indiana. And here's the kicker. They've been on the field a lot more. You can see the snaps right there. Ohio State, Indiana, both less than 400. Oregon's been on the field about 420 plus snaps. So they've been on the field a lot more, and they've held up just as good as those two other programs. What does that mean? It means your leaders figure it out, your veterans, the guys that matter when it comes to conditioning, being there in summer and spring, putting in the work, making sure you're doing good things in the weight room, taking training camp seriously, taking practice seriously. That's what Tuioti is. He's one of those leaders. He's one of these key guys that's been around a lot with this program. Lanning shouting him out rewards that feedback, rewards that effort that he put in, and not only gets Tuioti to keep putting forth that effort, keep being that leader, it also lets the young guys know, hey, listen, if I put in the time and I'm a good player, even if I don't get props in the media or anything like that, my coach has my back. And I guarantee you, other recruits, potential transfers, they see that same thing. This is the underrated genius of Dan Lanning. People look at him as a great defensive mind, as a great recruiter, as a great transfer guy, and all that's 100% true, right? Undeniably so. But the way he manages the culture actually feeds into those things. And this latest statement, not a big thing in terms of making headlines, but incredibly important, I think speaks to his genius as a leader of this program. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are. But first, Ducks fans, in the comment section below, as we look towards the rest of the season down the home stretch here, what's the one game, if you can only pick one game, that really worries you as an Oregon fan, right? Obviously, one loss you can overcome, but a second loss, that could be disastrous. What's one game right now, Oregon fans, that has you really concerned? Put it in the comment section below. But Miles, I will throw it over to you now. What are your thoughts on all things Dan Lanning and Oregon?
Yeah, I think you touch on something that I think is really crucial here, and it's like a recruiting thing, but it's not really a recruiting thing that recruits are going to pay attention to. It's a recruiting thing that when recruits come to Oregon, the players are going to be able to voice what is going on at Oregon as far as the recognition and, just pointing out of guys that he does not think get enough credit. And I think that's really crucial. I think that's a good quality to have as a head coach, as a leader of any kind of thing. Even if you go like the business world, uh, you Fortune 500 company, if you have a boss that's out there, and this is probably a little bit, kind of wider of a scenario here, but if the boss of this company is saying, hey, the janitor, the tutorial staff's doing a really good job cleaning the floors, making everything look nice, it's going to make them work harder. It's going to make other people want to be there if you give shine to people who don't really get noticed all the time. Obviously, I wouldn't call Tuioti, janitor level, very good player, probably, some sort of VP level kind of guy there, but nonetheless, getting shine for people who really haven't been noticed enough this season or, aren't getting the comparisons like they need to be. That's really good because it's important. Getting his name out there, raising his draft stock, all these kind of things. It's going to be great. And when other, incoming recruits come to Oregon, he's going to be like, hey, look, all this season, no one really ever giving me the credit. I'm having a really great season. Coach Lanning goes on TV, brings me up, talks about me, tells me how good of tells everyone how good of a player I am. They need to pay attention to me a little bit more. I think that's invaluable. People are going to like that, and that's going to show that, the integrity, the strength of this program going forward. And he has had a killer season. He's gotten better, and he had his best game by far against Rutgers. Really knocked it out of the park in that one, a 91.8 overall defensive grade for Tuioti. So really great job. I think he's doing a good thing. But I think the key here is that this is a team that has strong coaching, strong leadership. And it's like you said, sometimes you have missteps. Sometimes you take a step back, you lose a game to an opponent, and, it kind of derails the season. But the teams that have the good coaches, the teams that have the leadership in place to handle that, it can fire you up. It can help you. Sometimes you need to take that punch in the gut one time to say, hey, we are mortal. We really need to practice. We need to try harder. We need to make sure that we're going to be able to win going forward. So I think that's a great quality. I think Dan Lanning is a guy that's capable of doing that. And what he's done here for Tuioti, I think, is a big, big time thing, showing that they're ready for that and they're able to move this thing forward. I think, like you said, Oregon shooing a team to make the college football playoff, but I think this is a team that can go all the way and win the whole thing.
Yeah, and just one final point to end on. As good as Oregon is, and they're obviously heavily favored the rest of their way. I think if you look at ESPN analytics, their least likely victory is right around 71%. I think that's against USC, right? So right now they're heavy favorites, right? This weekend they got a 97.2% chance to win. So they're going to be odds-on favorites the rest of the way. So if you're Dan Lanning, how do you keep your team centered? How do you keep the team, not just thinking they're going to win every single game by a million because they're favored? You have them focus on themselves. You have them focus on playing well internally, right? You don't have them worry about Wisconsin or USC or Iowa or whoever. You just sit there and say, how can we be the best Oregon Ducks defense? How can I be the best Oregon Ducks linebacker? And so on. And that mindset, that focus, it starts with his comments by rewarding people's good individual efforts. It's all full circle, right? It's not individual, just random accolades here and there without a purpose. This is a clear strategy from Dan Lanning, and I think it's going to have a massive impact both this season for the Oregon Ducks 2025 chances, but for the future as well.